Welcome to 77th episode of Silver Lining for Learning. And today we have a really quite a big topic. It's what should education be? Because we've been talking a lot about education reforms, education transformation, educational changes, and many countries, many systems have taken different actions to reform, to change. And through Silver Lining, we've got a lot of guests making all kinds of innovations, making amazing changes. So at a broader level, what should education be? And for that, we got two very distinguished guests. We got Tony Wagner. Tony Wagner has done a lot. You know, what impressed me most is your book that have been sold 140,000 copies, you know, called The Global Achievement Gap. You know, why even our best schools are not serving our students well. And together with Tony, we have Ted Dintersmith. Tony and Ted, they have co-produced kind of a movie called Mostly Likely to Succeed, featuring about modern schools. And afterwards, Ted wrote a book called What Should Schools Be? I think something like that. Sorry I got your title wrong. I have it somewhere. But they've really been talking a lot about where education should go, what education can be, what our existing system is missing. So I may just give you a few minutes to Tony and Ted, each individually introduce yourself but also introduce your main ideas. So Tony, how about we start with you?
Well, first, a small correction. Ted gets 100% of the credit for that fabulous film, Most Likely to Succeed. And the lion's share of the credit for the book that came after, just to set the record straight. Been along for the ride. I've had a great time, but that was Ted's genius. It really was. But to answer your question, Young, I start with a very simple premise, but one that I think has profound implications. Our education system is not failing. I mean, certainly it's failing some kids, but overall, that's not the problem. And reforms are not going to fix our education system. The system is obsolete. It was born at the dawn of the industrial era. And now we have an entirely new era. It is the innovation era. And that is an era about which Ted knows a great deal because he's been a real mover and shaker in that domain for a very long time.
Ted?
Sure. Well, Tony is always so generous, but I owe so much to Tony, and the global achievement gap changed my world. I mean, I read that and I just said, this is really mind altering. And so I put him in the same category as John Dewey and Maria Montessori in terms of showing the way. You know, my background, I spent most of my career in the world of venture capital. So I was working with top entrepreneurs in a world that is very much like the world is going to be for everyone going forward. And what I realized at a certain point was that school is not only not preparing kids for that world, it actually is anti-preparing them for that world. And with my own kids, I used to say to their school, if you just waste their time, I'll be pretty happy. You know, just don't ruin them. And that sounds bleak, but I think it's quite accurate, right? Because you know, if you think about what's going to be required going forward, kids need to be bold and audacious and challenging and leverage resources and be excited about wading into ambiguous circumstances and situations, you know, a whole set of things. Tony has his 7 survival skills. And what I see way too often is that the accountability metrics shape schools in ways that discourage kids from being good at exactly what they need to be good at going forward. And it's very difficult to do remediation when you put kids through 12, 14, 16 years of pointless hoop jumping and then say, now be bold. When you say, outcompete your classmates on measures you don't care about, and say, now work together to be great global citizens. And so to me, this is code red. And I often wonder why more people than the people on this video chat, we all see that, right? But it's a bit puzzling why this isn't code red broadly.
So you guys are so polite to each other. I can't believe it. But anyway, thanks for the correction, minor correction. So I'm going to throw out the first question. I'm trying to write an article. Can we let go the premise of schools when we talk about education? Can we let go? Because, you know, Even though Ted, you said so much about school, it's wrong, but you still wrote a book with a title. The title includes schools in it. So can we just let go schools and talk about education? This goes to both Ted and Tony. What do you think?
Well, I love that notion in a way, but rather than letting go of the word of school, I'd like to expand it. In my world, a high school diploma would be a certificate of mastery, whereas today it's simply a certificate of seat time served. You don't master anything in high school, nothing. You don't graduate with any skills, none. So let's make a high school diploma a collection of merit badges, some required, some elective. And those merit badges can be earned 24/7, 365, anywhere, anytime. And a school becomes a building where you sometimes meet with peers, you sometimes meet with a mentor or a coach, and you get to present and defend your work, you get your work critiqued. That happens in a building we call school, but it could happen anywhere. So let's expand the notion of school, but fundamentally redefine its purpose.
So hold on, Tony. I want to. This is what I'm struggling with. Should school then, in that case, still have one curriculum for all kids?
No, I do think we should have a set of merit badges for work, learning, and citizenship. The skills are the same for the first time in human history. So you have to think critically for work. You have to think critically as a citizen. You have to think critically as a lifelong learner, just to use one example. Same with communication skills. You know the 4 C's, 5 C's, whatever you want to call them. So those, to me, are kind of help define the purpose of school. And beyond that, part of the rationale for the purpose of school is that you have mentors, you have coaches, you have guides. And so for me, there is a role here in education, but that how each kid earns his or her merit badge, how each young person shows his or her mastery can vary enormously. And then there are many elective merit badges. Some may want the entrepreneur's merit badge. Some may want a merit badge in digital literacy, which is something Ted knows a great deal about and has been supporting. So I think we have many paths to certain competencies, and many, many competencies kids may aspire to master. So to me, there's room for a tremendous individuation of learning.
Okay, Ted, I want your
Sure.
response. Then Punya has a question. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So, there's a semantic issue about school. So if you ask me, school narrowly defined as standardized curriculum, the accountability metrics we have now, the college admissions process, the state requirements for graduation. If you ask me what I would do with that, I'd take a bulldozer to it. And when I speak to adult audiences, I often ask them what experiences during the years they were in school made them the person they are today. And everybody has them. I think broadly defined, the idea of kids coming together in the same place and being inspired by adults who challenge them in different ways to stretch and to learn how to learn and to create and accomplish things. I think that's a very exciting notion. And so the book I wrote, What School Could Be, I highlighted that it's not as though we don't know how to do it. This isn't nuclear fusion where we're like, oh my gosh, maybe in 10 or 20 years, we'll crack the code and figure out how to do it. We know how to do it. There are teachers doing it every single day across America and other countries as well. It's just in nooks and crannies. And because of that, so many kids are being left behind.
All right. Thank you, Punya.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I'm really always intrigued by is people like yourself, who have had these diverse backgrounds and interests and end up in this space called education. And Tony, I remember getting your book, Learning by Heart. And I remember telling you that I read it like almost as if it was one of those airport bestsellers. It was, it's actually, if people haven't read it, I strongly recommend it as a wonderful, and it allowed me to get sort of behind, having read your other work, but this one was such a personal story. So I'm wondering, where do these sort of the values or perspectives that you bring to this work come from? Because I think very often in education, we have not found a space for discussing those deeper. And so I think a lot of the decisions that we have to do with those underlying challenges. I mean, I remember when I was a grad student in Illinois, like my first advisor, he and I, we would just not see eye to eye on a research project. And it turned out that we just had different metaphors in our head about the role of research. I mean, he sort of saw it as building an edifice brick by brick. I saw it as a network. It took a year for me to figure out that we were sort of just approaching the issue differently, and there was no way that we could reconcile that, and I needed to shift and whatever. So I'm just curious to understand, like, what are these perspectives and values that you bring to this? And because to me, if we can communicate that, I think a large part of our sort of chasm of communication that we see around educational issues in the public sphere can maybe be resolved. So it's a very open-ended question, but it's sort of but prompted, Tony, by your book, and I'm sort of curious, Ted, where that comes from in your perspective. So whoever wants to go first.
Ted, you want to go first?
No, I'm going to let you, because I'm going to echo Punya about the brilliance of learning by heart. So I do hope everybody picks that up and reads it.
Thank
But
you.
go ahead.
Well, I wrote Learning by Heart, Punya, in part to answer the question you just posed. For me, I was a one-time high school dropout, two-time college dropout. I hated school, absolutely hated school. And so I became an educator to try to become the kind of teacher I wished I had had. And Learning by Heart is kind of the story of that journey. But, the other very formative part of my growing up and young adulthood was being a product of both the civil rights movement and the anti-war movement. Second time I dropped out, I was about to be drafted. I became a conscientious objector. I did 2 years of civilian service. I was very active in the civil rights movement. And I vividly remember, Punya, meeting a countryman of yours at a anti-war conference, Narayan Desai. His father had been a secretary to Gandhi, and Desai had been very involved in the Indian movement for independence. And I had this crazy idea that, I could talk to him, and, I knew nothing. I was a young kid who full of himself, 20 something, maybe 19. But, I got a chance to talk with him in his dorm room where we were all staying. And he was sitting on the floor dressed in khadi, the simple white hand-spun cotton. And he had a portable spinning wheel that he was using. As we talked, a couple of us were there. He was spinning cotton. And so I asked him, why do you still spin cotton? He said, to learn patience, because nonviolent revolution requires patience. And then I said, but what is revolution, Mr. Desai? And he said, revolution is the dynamic process of transforming individual virtues into social values. And when I heard that, Punya, I said, well, I have more than one reason to become an educator, don't I? Yes, I want to empower kids, and I want to teach them to communicate with their own voice. And I spent a whole decade doing what I call educational R&D, and figuring out how to do that. But it was also out of this sense of wanting to build a better society and believe the foundation of a better society is education. And I have to say, now more than ever, boy, is that true.
Thank you, Ted.
My best bet is to say nothing after that. But I may just leave here and start spinning cotton, because I'm not long on patience, so I could use some help there. For me, a lot of what shaped my views, I mean, I grew up in a lower income area of Virginia, but I think back to when I was in school, and it was so relaxed. My classmates, I'm 69 years old now, and when I talk to classmates, none of us can really remember doing homework. School was not all consuming. And I think one of the things that's really unfortunate is we have turned every 18-year-old's life into this sprint to excellence, but it's not even meaningful excellence, it's hollow excellence. And so I think it's fair to say we're ruining lots of childhoods with a model that says this is an uber competitive education system with a very stratified set of higher education institutions, with college admissions officers that I think are the perhaps least innovative set of people in the universe. And so I feel like, man, I'm a big fan. You probably have had him on earlier, but Pasi Sahlberg, in his book, Let the Children Play, I think we need to sort of step back and say what really helps kids turn into, purposeful adults prepared for the world they're going to live in. And, that's happening, as I said, in bits and spots locally, but it's just not happening broadly. And the thing that I'd add to this is, having spent 30 plus years in technology innovation, I think people consistently underestimate the profound changes that technology advances are bringing down on society. And so you look at robotics, that's making progress by the month. It's not blistering, but 25, 50% a year better in terms of, price performance. Artificial intelligence is racing ahead. This has vast implications for what career paths are going to look like and for citizenship. And we're tinkering around the edges on a model that should have been retired a long time ago.
Well, thank you. Tony, indeed, Learning by Heart is a wonderful book. I really enjoyed that you talked to the Indian person and you got that. That's actually quite amazing. I never ran into an Indian when I was young. So, but anyway, Ted, you have very interesting and very ambitious view of the future of education. I'm going to just hold that, but now I'll let Chris jump in to say, Chris has comments and a question. Chris.
Well, I want to go back to Young's initial question about school, and I want to build on what Tony said about society, because there's an inherent tension between personalization, which I think is valuable and powerful, and I favor educational systems that enable that. I remember, reading Summerhill way back when I was in graduate school, and we've had episodes of this show where people have talked extensively about personalization and unschooling and so on. I have no problems with that. I think it's really important. But we also need to have communities. And communities, contrary to what's happening in the world today, are not cults. They're not places where everybody believes the same thing. Communities are intrinsically, if they're strong, they're like ecosystems. They're diverse. People fulfill different roles within the community that complement one another. There are tensions within the community that are constantly dynamic. And people also need to have that set of skills, which clearly industrial education does not give us. It may give us conformity, but it doesn't give us community. So I think somehow, whatever we call it, we need educational systems that on the one hand personalize, but on the other hand personalize within the context of an appreciation for community, an appreciation for diversity, an appreciation for the whole being more than the sum of the parts in terms of our interactions with other people. And that's not easy. I know more about how to create educational systems that only personalize or only build community than I know about how to do both at the same time.
I think that's an incredibly important point, Chris. If there's one thing we've learned in this COVID crisis, it's the difference between those who can think of the common good and, frankly, those who can't. Those who think the common good means somehow a restriction on their individual freedoms. So I think it's a very profound comment. And the only answer I can give quickly is that in the many small schools that I have observed, public, charter, where students are part of advisories, not just a perfunctory once a week for a semester or a year, but an advisory that becomes an extended family. And a small school where there is a real sense of shared values and shared culture, it is then what Narayan Desai described, the development of individual virtues translating into shared values. So I think the issue is scale. I don't see how you can create a sense of community in our shopping mall high schools as a term I think Ted Sizer coined many years ago. It's impossible. You have to break them into smaller units. I think the ideal unit is 4 teachers and 100 kids. And it maybe spread over 4 years, you've got a maximum of 200 or 400 kids in a high school. It's interesting. The average the average independent high school is rarely more than about 50 kids a class, 200, 400 in that range for the entire 4 years. So I think it is important to create the sense of community you're describing, but it requires fundamentally restructuring as well as rethinking school.
Ted, you have any response to what Chris said?
Well, one of the terms that's used a lot in education that has multiple interpretations is personalized learning, right? And so you'll have on the one hand, people who think, going through obsolete curriculum with some video lectures at your own pace is personalized. I mean, that seems like useless personalized learning. I think where I find kids come to life and where I feel they are developing a deep sense of participation and involvement in their community is when they create and take on and carry out initiatives that in some way, shape, or form make their world better and work together in teams and start to see that maybe this kid is good at one thing and this kid's good at something quite different. But, I do believe these kids all have their gifts and strengths, and school really only values a very narrow slice of them that I think is increasingly irrelevant. And as a result, so many of these kids are getting a message that somehow you're just not good enough, or you're not smart, or you're not proficient. I mean, one person I met along the way said that the one SAT word that all the students she fights so hard for knows quite well is proficient, because they get these standardized tests year in and year out that tell them they are not proficient. And so when you look at this, and I feel like there's this enormous opportunity. Should this be all of school? Maybe not. Should it be some of school? Absolutely. Giving kids a chance to create and invent initiatives that make the world better, where they leverage resources, learn how to learn, draw on colleagues, adults, other classmates, and stick with it till they've accomplished something they're proud of. I think that gives them a sense of citizenship. And I think done right, helps them develop proficiencies that are hireable. So it actually prepares them for career, which it's heartbreaking to me, but a lot of 22 and 23-year-olds I interview who've gotten done with college, having been to high schools and colleges that say they prepare kids for careers, have zero career skills that matter. 16 years and often $300,000 of education, and they're not good at one single thing that an employer would value immediately. That's a lot of years not to have given some attention to that.
So I know Kurt has a question, but I can't resist, but I have to jump in because when Tony is talking about the idea about a small high school, and Ted's talking about the broader context of online and learning, all those things. You also mentioned about Paz. Yes, Paz was on our show. He came on, and we did talk about let children play. But I was wondering, is it possible to have just virtual high schools if a student so chooses? If a student said, okay, in my local community, there's nobody I really like to hang out with. I'd like to hang out with somebody from India. Mr. What? Tony, what's the guy's name? Mr. Masai or what?
Narayan Desai.
Yeah, Desai, Mr. Desai. I just want to hang out. And you said, I want to have a school with kids from other countries. So is it possible to do that? And how would you think of those things?
I don't know. I think it's an interesting way of thinking about it. I guess in my own experience, having some kind of face-to-face interactions is critical for building trust. And I think community demands not just shared values, beliefs, and behaviors, shared culture, but it's predicated on trust, something that has radically eroded in our society today. So I'm certainly open to the possibility. I also think that kids are going to need to learn how to get along with people who are different from them. And at its best, some schools provide that kind of an opportunity. Learning to live with differences, as Chris Dede said, is a very important 21st century skill, but an interesting idea.
Well, the
Yeah,
reason I raised
yeah,
that because I am very I'm not very social with people who are close to me, so I'm always trying to justify my own actions online. So that's how I justify my Saturday, like afternoons with these guys. Anyway, Ted, go ahead.
no. I mean, I think people draw a sharp distinction between online and in person, when the sharp distinction should be what they're doing, right? There's a lot of terrible in-person curriculum. Teachers droning on about something the kids don't care about, and then being tested on fact-based, exams. Put that online, it's just as bad. But I don't know whether to call you Young or Zhao. I'll say Dr. Young Zhao. You know, I visited, one of the things that just blew me away was going to a school where the students were challenged to weigh in on US policy relative to Syria. And as part of that, they researched and found students in Syria and had online collaborations with those students. These were very resourceful students, but just sort of give an open field. Find a way to connect to some kids in Syria and interview them about what's going on there and whether they think policies that are being implemented by the US in theory to help Syria are positive. And so what happens in work today? I mean, in work, people collaborate across global boundaries. I mean, the last board seat I had was a company that had employees living in 12 different countries, a 200-person company, employees in 12 different countries, not from, but they were living in 12 different countries, all working together. And so that seems like if we're not doing it, it's a good skill for kids to have. And I do, as I travel, find places that have kids collaborating in person or virtually to accomplish interesting objectives, to carry a project forward. But I really keep coming back to, it's not the in-person or the online that tells the tale. It's, are they studying, working on something that's going to help them develop a competence that actually matters long-term.
Well, I mean, so far we've been working from different states, and we have guests from different countries all the time. So that's this case. Anyway, Kurt, go ahead.
I see a question from Lydia. So I think maybe hers is better than mine. So we can go after, I'll go after her. Punya, you want to ask the question?
Sure. Yes. So I'm just following the chat on YouTube. So Elizabeth had a couple of comments about how important it was, this idea of the group and the community. But Lydia has this, I think, really interesting question, which is saying, I'm wondering your thoughts on the role of parents and families in building this new vision of school. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I mean,
well, I defer to you, Ted, because I know this is at the heart of what you want to work on.
Yeah, I mean, parents, they by and large have incredibly good intentions when they're advocating for their kids. And I think all too often their intentions and the reality are at odds. And so I often find parents are among the more resistant to innovation. They think that, schoolwork for me, why is this different? We have a great scene in the film, Most Likely to Succeed, with the parent of Samantha saying, when are they going to memorize the capital of Latvia, and, this, that, and the other thing. And so parents have that natural instinct. And so I think that there's an opportunity to bring parents around. I mean, that's one of the powerful effects I think Most Likely to Succeed has had, is that it's not a film strictly for educators. I mean, it's been seen by, maybe up to 10 million people at this point, but a lot of parents. And when parents see that film and they see kids working on projects they enjoy, and kids who can't wait to get to school every day, and kids who are home working late at night because they want to, they sort of say, man, I want my kid in that kind of school. So I think there is a lot of leverage in the parents that are out there. They want good things for their kids, but as I said, they often are locked into a view that's not helpful.
I completely agree with that. I would only add a couple of quick thoughts. I think too often we in education are looking for buy-in for our answers, whatever those answers happen to be, often reform du jour, fad of the month club. We need to shift our thinking from buy-in to ownership. There is not a single educational transformation that can take place without parents in some way being partners in the process, albeit with skepticism. But I think we need to start with, as Einstein said, the formulation of the problem or the question. How do we better prepare all young people in the 21st century for work, learning, and citizenship? I think the idea of starting with a profile of a graduate that communities shape and define is a very important place to start. The other piece I would simply add is we need to have some empathy for parents today. Parents today are far more anxious than a quarter of a century ago or more. They see a world that is much, much more competitive, and they're frightened. They're frightened for their kids. They want to give their kids a competitive advantage. And the only competitive advantage they can see is the one that worked in their lifetimes, which is get into the right school, get the right job. Well, those competitive advantages are gone. They don't work anymore, but most parents don't know that. So we're going to have to help them see this world in a new light.
So I want to jump in.
Can
I'm
I add
sorry.
one other thing to that? Could I just add, because it's a recent, I saw a study that was like 95% of parents think their kids need to go to the right college to get a good job. And you look at the reality of kids who head off to college, and it's not living up to that at all. And I think that parents, as they're draining their savings account and going into, taking on second mortgages or piling their kid up with student loan debt, eventually they're going to get the message that there are other ways. And I also think parents, I've often found it so interesting, like we talked about posse in Finland. If a kid says, I want to be an electrician, or I want to be a plumber, or want to be a master carpenter, parents are really excited about that. And I think in the US, we've drunk so much college Kool-Aid that parents are often, would rather have their kid head off to college, drop out, who knows what, drift through that experience, than do something they really want to do. And by the way, our high schools send that message emphatically to kids. When I visit high schools, particularly low-income high schools, but any high school, halls are filled with college pennants, posters saying, you too can do it, you can go to college, basically telling kids that success in America in the 21st century equals a college degree. But the harsh reality is a lot of kids are getting a lousy deal in that pursuit.
So I want to just jump in with one comment, and Kurt will jump in, because it's another thing I've been tracing recently is that, in many developing countries and developing areas, parents are not in any position to guide or force their kids. I remember after first grade, I was the most educated in my village. I was educating my parents. So my father just got up, just saying, no, do whatever you like. So I was telling him where to buy water buffaloes. And we did a research on Northern Ireland. We used the kids to teach parents how to do farm rice instead of farming opium. And we did the same thing in Vietnam. So that's something, because when you talk about TED, you're talking about rich kids, and rich parents, the low-income parents, they can't come to school, they have 3 jobs. I was just wondering, how do we get the kids to help their parents? By the way, actually, my kids helped me as immigrants to let me know a lot more things. Punya, you might have the same thing. We know with a lot of US things, I have no idea, but my kids kind of help me understand, So that's just a comment about how today I think we're over parenting. We teach parents to say, we have the science, parents read a lot of books. I'm not saying smart parents is not necessary. I'm just saying it's possible to bring low-income kids to serve as social agent, in many ways. It was just a comment on that. Kurt, you want to jump in?
First of all, I don't know where Ted went to school, but in Catholic elementary school in Milwaukee, we sure did homework. And in fact, I can give you some of my memories, Ted, because every night I got up around 10, 11 o'clock at night and took a flashlight and did my brother's homework as well. So, I was worried about the Catholic nuns would flunk him and he'd be stuck forever in elementary school. So no, there was plenty of homework that was done at that time. And let me give a shout out to my auntie, who's a nun, who turned 80 this past week. Aunt Rose, happy 80th. And also to my neighbor, who let me use her encyclopedias every day so I'd know enough stuff to do my brother's homework. Donna Farrington passed away 2 days ago. I want to give a shout out to her because she really helped my life out. And that's what it is, people helping each other out with resources that we have to help each other succeed, right? And before I get to my question, I also want to thank Tony for this book and get a little advertisement for Tony in here. So please buy this book, Learning by Heart, an Unconventional Education. And this is important for Chris, for Young, for Punya and myself, because we all aspire to write books like this. And I hope that we have a couple minutes so you can give us some of your advices on how one approaches such a monumental book that's kind of a memoir of sorts, a historical, and how one remembers all the history, how did you keep all those notes? And I mean, I really want to know. But before I go to my question, I also have to thank, both Ted and Tony for this book, Most Likely to Succeed, Preparing Our Kids for the Innovation Era. Excellent book as well. And I have this book. It says from this came from a library somewhere because my students stole mine. They stole my copy of Creating Innovators. And so I got this a couple of months ago because I don't have the copy anymore, can't find it. And there's this chart in there, okay? And this chart, the chart's in here, it's helping us understand how to create a culture of innovation. And let me give you a backdrop for this. In 2006, I went to Thailand and they had me talk about Education 2.0. In 2013, I went to Thailand, back to Bangkok and Chiang Mai and other places, and I had to talk about Education 3.0. And 3 or 4 years ago, I went back to Thailand. They want me to talk about Education 4.0. And what Education 4.0 for the Thai people is this innovation age. So, and Tony, you talked about we're in an innovation age. It's a different age, different skills and so forth. But I didn't know what to talk about. I had to make stuff up. Could you give me something substantive to talk to them next time about creating a culture of innovation? How does one do that? And has that changed at all? Have your ideas changed since 2012 when this Creating Innovators book came out? Have you refined them at all? And can you help the audience that will watch this tape later, graduate students and other educators around the world will be watching this and want to know how to create a culture of innovation. So can you jump in here and give us some perspective on that?
I'll do what I can, but again, Ted knows a great deal about that whole world
and
of
Ted
innovation.
Too. Yeah.
But let me just sort of clarify. Most people are still under the illusion that we live in a so-called knowledge economy. Peter Drucker coined that term 50 years ago in 1969. Today, knowledge has become a mere commodity, growing exponentially, changing constantly on every internet-connected device. There's no longer a competitive advantage in knowing the person next to you more than the person next to you because that person uses Google, right? So the world does not care how much our kids know. That's maybe 3.0. What the world cares about is what our kids can do with what they know. So that's the fundamental shift. Now, it gets back to what Ted has observed and others about the exponential growth of artificial intelligence, raising the questions, what is it that we individuals, we human beings can uniquely do that computers cannot? And it's creativity, creative problem solving in the largest domain. So what I learned in researching that book, when I interviewed a lot of very successful young creative problem solvers, equal numbers of young men, young women, some for first generation immigrants, some have been here a long time, his family's been here a long time. I learned many things, interviewing their parents, interviewing the teachers who'd made a difference in their lives. But it boiled down to both parents and teachers encouraging play, passion, and purpose. More exploratory play, fewer toys, toys without batteries, time outside. In intellectual play, in terms of playing with ideas, asking good questions. Play evolving into exploration of passions, as Ted was saying earlier. But passions morph, they evolve into a deeper sense of purpose. And it comes full circle because pursuing one's purpose becomes a form of adult play. So that's fundamentally what I learned a decade ago in the research. The only things that I've learned since is that this is now increasingly important as more and more computers do more and more of the routine work, white collar and blue collar. The real competitive advantage is our creativity.
Ted, you want to jump in and add to that?
Sure. I do spend a fair amount of time focused on what artificial intelligence is doing. And I heard an interview. I'm generally, out there in terms of predicting how fast things are moving ahead. And then the CEO of OpenAI, I heard an interview with him, and what he said ought to get all of our attention, which is he said that he believes artificial intelligence is increasing in its capability roughly 10x per year, and that it could stay on that pace for another decade. And so Chris could do this in his head, but 10 to the 10th is 10 billion. And so we're already at a point where AI can, just given data, can outperform the world's best, chess player, the world's best Go player, the world's best Texas Hold'em player. How hard is it to outperform the world's best customer service agent? That's all going to happen, and it doesn't happen in a day or a week or a month, but over a 10-year period, it's going to happen. Let's think about our K through 12 kids. That will define the world they're in. And one point that I think is important is that the number of defined structured jobs is just going down year in and year out. Those jobs are on their way out. And what isn't on the way out are opportunities for adults who can create interesting things that help their community, help their organization. And they can create those as part of an organization, or they can create their own career path. But that whole notion of creating your own distinctive path forward, instead of jumping through the hoops put in front of you, is I think the crux of the issue about what gets emphasized in schools. Because, going back, and I may be older than Kurt, but I also did go to Catholic grade school, and but back
older
then,
than Kurt's better than being older than dirt. Okay, just
yeah,
clarifying that.
When I was getting out of school, almost all the economy were job descriptions, hierarchy, do this job for 2 or 3 years, go to the next labor grade. It was AT&T and large banks and Aetna. That was the economy. And the innovation part of it was this tiny little kernel. Well, today, a third of the jobs are innovation-driven jobs. And in 10 years, 2/3 of the jobs will be innovation-driven jobs, but they won't just happen, right? Those are the jobs that you need to have the mindset and the skills to create. And what I worry about is so many of the young adults I interview who have done extremely well in education, whose parents will beg me to talk to them because they're having trouble finding a job, ask them, well, what are you doing? Tell me about your job search. And it's like, I'm writing letters and I'm filling in online forms. And all that happens is I get turned down. And I say, well, have you thought about what career you could create? And they'll look at you like, whoa, you mean that's an option? You mean I could actually create my own career path? And the answer is, of course you can, but you have to visualize you can do it in order to do that. And the one last thing I make about this, our education system, if you haven't had Paul Tough on this, you should have Paul Tough. I think his work is immensely important, and his most recent book, which how many books get retitled after they've been released, but it's been retitled The Inequality Machine. And talking about higher ed in this country, and hey, shout out to Punya and ASU, because I think they're fighting this trend. But by and large, our education system piles added advantage on the affluent. The kids that need the least help get the best advantages through higher ed, and the kids that most need help, I think, get largely, a very short end of the stick. And so you sort of say, if you look at that and say, wait a minute, what could we do differently? What I find is that when kids are actually asked to create something bold, where you're valuing their resourcefulness, it's often the super rich kids that freeze up with that. They've had every single step of their life micromanaged by their parents. And the kids that are in the more challenging circumstances, the kids whose test scores say they're not proficient, they just, not all, but so many of them jump into life when it's something they care about. And to me, that's an important thing, is school playing to and rewarding kids for their intrinsic motivation as they create something they feel is important, or is kids largely hollow bullshit that reflects the resources and the push of the parents? And the more is the latter, the more we're going to have massive problems with income inequality in our country.
So Ted, basically you're trying to justify, you're trying to glorify the kids who fail like me. So I've been arguing for, like Tony too. What's our survival skills? Basically, we can do the basic math and literacy. We don't pass standardized testing. So you're justifying those things. Okay, that's a joke. But anyway, I want actually have this is a hard question to ask because no one really knows what's going to happen. Because, we're unhappy about schools. We're unhappy about the curriculum. We're unhappy about a lot of things, what's happening. However, we know that even at least in the US and Australia and the UK, in this country, actually almost every public school, you have a government. The US is probably, US and Canada is more decentralized. The government actually, through standardized testing, they have laws to hold kids. For example, in nearly 30 states said kids, if you cannot read by 3rd grade, you cannot, get promoted to 4th grade. So we have a law. We have No Child Left Behind. We have now what's the new law under Obama, all those kind of things. Do you guys see government changing? I know they adopt words, like creativity, curiosity, the 4 C's, 5 C's, 10 C's, English is a great language, it has many words with C's, so you have all of those things. Do you see Ted and Tony, the government making any significant, meaningful changes?
Here's a little bit of history that I think it's easy for us to forget. We got what I call accountability 1.0, not because of government, but because of business. Lou Gerstner, then CEO of IBM, David Kearns of Xerox, they did a national big deal convention on education. All the CEOs came, and because all the CEOs came, of course, all the governors came. Of course, then all the senators and Congress people wanted to come too. This was 1996. Do you know how many educators came to that conference? 5. And they were only invited as observers. Why? Because of the profound mistrust between teachers' unions and business and government. But my point is this: we got accountability 1.0, first the standards movement, and then No Child Left Behind, which was a bipartisan effort. And then finally Race to the Top. We got that primarily because we educators had not been doing the job we need to do, which is to disaggregate the data and look at who is failing. And so accountability 1.0 was meant to address a specific problem, the number of kids who were leaving behind. And we all know now that it did absolutely nothing to solve that problem. Now we have a new problem. Business leaders are extremely unhappy with the results of all this education reform. They look at high school grads, college grads who can't do a damn thing. But here's the difference. They're extremely reluctant to speak out. Business leaders, and I've talked to their HR departments, I've talked to people in the C-suites, they don't feel they can speak out. They're too busy. They've gone on now to global markets and global labor sources. So they've kind of, I think, given up on the American education marketplace. And I believe the only way we are going to move forward is to create what I call accountability 2.0. And that has to be a partnership between business, educators, community leaders, understanding, and it begins, I think, partly with us as educators. I want every educator to have a button, a badge, a bumper sticker that says, hold me accountable for what matters most. Yes, I'm willing to be held accountable for the growth of every kid in my classroom, provided you give me the resources and the time and the structures I need. I believe I should be held accountable for that. And more importantly, I want to be held accountable for the skills that matter most. And so we need business leaders as active, engaged, and vocal partners to create accountability 2.0 if we're going to change government. Government is not going to change by itself, and government does not listen to educators. Government listens to business. So we have a new job to create a new kind of partnership.
Thanks, Tony. I think your observation of the business losing interest is absolutely right. From 1996 really to until Obama. I think the business were very much into it, but now they're not as much into this education. Ted, you have anything to add about the government's changes? And then after that, Punya has a couple of
No,
questions.
I'll make the same offer to this audience I've made so many times, still hoping somebody will take me up on it, which is for people in a state to organize a statewide petition to insist that the legislators on the state education committee take with a proctor the exams that keep kids from graduating from high school and publish their results. And those tests would disappear overnight. There is not one state, maybe, I'd go, if 1 out of 100 state legislators could pass the 11th grade math exams the kids have to take, I'd be amazed. And you step back and you just say, you look at this bullshit in the math that everybody's got to study. And hey, I've got a PhD in math modeling. And so much of it is, it's just stuff no adult use. I mean, it's just, we don't teach financial literacy, but we teach, imaginary numbers or something, it's really tragic. Will governments change? I had high hopes for Biden and who he would appoint. I think that's been a mega disappointment. So, the thing I'd say to people is this, is education is dramatically different from global warming. Global warming, if we each do our part, but lots of others don't do their part, the planet's still going down. Like we all have to do something different to make it to affect the kind of change that's urgently needed. Education is not like that. A family can just say, hey, I don't buy this, kid in the family, this doesn't make sense. I'm going to have them do something different. And I'll tell you what I'm really excited about is kids who come out of high school with the competencies and the mindset to be able to create their own career path with or without more formal education. And, as we know, we all say it, anybody who wants to learn something can learn on their own today, right? These credentials, these seat time, distribution requirements, prerequisite, this whole bureaucratic mess that we put kids through to get a degree, you're going to see more and more kids going rogue on that. And actually more power to them. That's what I get excited about. So
basically, Ted, I heard from you, get rid of schools, learn on your own, get on YouTube, find your friends.
Well, it's you'd love school to be playing a positive role in this, and it is for some kids. So I'm not, but I think that, I just want to say this as clearly as I can, that kids that are given the support to create initiatives that make a positive contribution and have an entrepreneurial mindset are going to land on their feet, no matter what some college admissions officer tells them about whether they get in or don't get in to that institution. If a kid can create interesting things using their own talents, perseverance, and being able to draw on resources, that kid is going to be off and running in life. And to me, that should be an essential part of their experience as they go from, toddler to adulthood.
No question about that. Now, Punya, you got a bunch of questions.
Well, I have to say that the discussion on the YouTube chat is very active. There is no way I can get an abstract of that and put it up there. But I do appreciate all the people who are participating there. And again, Ted and Tony for fostering, in some sense, provoking that conversation. So that's awesome. But I wanted to ask a question. We had a chance, Ted, Tony, to work together on this thing, which, Project Springboard, where we had, vertical teams of teachers working together. And this web environment network that Ted and Tony both have been working on, What School Could Be, I think it's whatschoolcouldbe.org. Maybe like an answer to some of the questions that have emerged here and that are in the discussion is why you see that kind of a network of these vertical teams of getting educational leadership into this space as being valuable. Because I remember when I was at Michigan State, one of my greatest pleasures is working with teachers. But after a while, I realized that unless I started working with educational leaders, there was not going to be systemic change. So maybe speak a little bit. I know we are sort of tight on time now. So a couple of minutes maybe on like what you see as the value of that network and what are sort of the underlying frames of ideas that are behind that. And I'll introduce the next episode after that.
Ted.
Yeah, I'm going to steal your line, Tony. Innovation's a team sport. And what I've tried to do in my books, what we have on the whatschoolcouldbe.org website, which I hope everybody will check out. It's like got this vibrant community platform, Facebook without the scuzziness or ads and all these great resources. But but people like to be inspired by other people. People learn from other people. And I think when you can shine a light on things that work for an individual and say, don't copy it, but what can you take away from that that might be relevant to your practice? You unleash all sorts of pent up creativity in our school system. And I think that's true for our teachers and true for our students. And so, I remained a big believer in the potential of our teachers. I think we've given them challenges way beyond what they deserve to have to face. I do worry a lot about this recent, attacks on school boards. That's not helping anything. But I think when people draw on inspiration from other people and have an opportunity to share back the things they're learning, accomplishing, and proud of, I think there's incredible power in that kind of coalition.
I learned many years ago from a very dynamic and extraordinary superintendent, Tony Alvarado. He had a simple saying: isolation is the enemy of improvement. I would add, and Ted knows, isolation is the enemy of innovation. But teaching is arguably one of the most isolated professions in modern work life, which is one reason I think we have so little innovation and so much risk aversion, is this isolation of teachers. We have to start by breaking down those barriers, not just for teachers, but also for building leaders and system leaders.
Punya?
Well, I mean, should I start introduce the next episode, or are there any other questions or comments from Chris, Kurt, Zhao?
Can I just say, I want to say a thank you to the four of you. Yeah,
No, before that, don't thank us yet. I do have a question, but do it very quick.
Okay. I'll thank you twice.
Okay. No,
Oh,
I get
thank
so many
you.
questions because another one is everybody talks about, we talk about parents, we talk about students, we talk about governments, we talk about innovators, teachers. Give a good assessment of teachers and how can we change teacher education and teacher professional development. Very quick, you got 2 minutes. Anyone? We're gonna start with Ted.
Well, when I ask teachers why they entered the profession, the answer is generally some variant of I wanted to engage and inspire young kids in my community and help them reach the better version of themselves. And I have a great deal of confidence if we get out of their way, they would do that.
So you think if we get out of their way, they can do that? Tony, what do you think?
I would add only that they're going to need help and support. And so I think we have to really transform both pre-service and in-service learning for educators. Too much theory, too little coaching from experts who really have been in the classroom for a long period of time. That's what Finland does well. You want to know what really good teacher preparation looks like. You want to know what really good teacher working conditions look like. They work half as many hours as American teachers, meaning time in front of kids. So we have a lot to learn and a long way to go, but there are very clear models for dramatically better ways of preparing and supporting our teachers.
Well, Punya and we were talking, I think Chris were involved about this teacher preparation too. We just think teachers were not exposed, did not experience a diversity of teaching possibilities or different ways of teaching. I just got a passage just sent me this book, the Finnish teacher book it's quite interesting. Now, Punya, back to you. You are going to announce next week, but thank you guys, Tony and Ted. This has been a wonderful conversation. We might bring you back again in a few months to say, have you changed your mind? We'll talk about education 5.0, right? That's good. We keep going up higher. Okay.
Well, thank you all
so
for
much.
your great questions and comments. It's really been fun.
Thank you. Punya, announce
Right.
next semester.
So again, a shout out to all the people in the YouTube chat. And I do apologize that there was no way we could capture all of that richness in this conversation because of issues of time and so on. But I think some of the themes that we have touched on already, and especially ending around this idea of teacher preparation and teacher professional development and personalization of learning, which we talked about earlier. And if you think about, the standard model for when we think of school is this one teacher with a group of students, and you start realizing how untenable that model possibly is. So many of the teachers quit within the first year of getting into the profession, which basically to me means that they are not getting the scaffolding and support that they need. teaching as a profession, in some ways, the context of your teaching is the same as day one as on day 3000. So which means we are not providing opportunities for them to grow professionally in their careers. The only way that happens is the switch to admin. So if you're a good teacher, it's actually a loss to your school when one of them goes into that rather than growing into that profession. And it's in some ways meeting the needs of those 25, 30, 18, whatever the number of kids there is an untenable sort of expectation from this one person. And so one of the things, and I've sort of been hesitant to bring ASU into these conversations because it seems vaguely nepotistic, but since we're having these conversations, next week we're going to have two people who work, one within ASU and one outside of ASU, who are working on this new sort of the next education workforce staffing models, which seeks to build what we call distributed expertise. This may include lead education designers, it may include interns, it may include members of the community in different roles in order to meet the needs of all students. So personalization, I think, in a different way than I think, Ted, I think you were joking about that, here is, you can choose which video you want to watch, but sort of a genuine engagement with the students. And the idea here is to provide all students with deeper personalized learning. ASU has been piloting, the Teachers College has been piloting this since 2019 in one school. And right now, these models are around 30 plus schools in and around and growing even more. So our guests are going to be Dr. Brent Madden, who is the Executive Director of the Next Education Workforce. And he sort of leads this effort from our college. And one of the schools that's been doing this sort of innovative staffing models is Stevenson Elementary in Mesa. In fact, Mesa has, I think, agreed that over 50% of the schools in the next few years are going to have these different models. And the principal of Stevens Elementary, Krista Adams, is going to be a guest as well. So we will have one person who's leading the broad initiative and one person who is in the trenches making it work.